Have you ever sat in a room full of people you raised, people you trusted, people you believed would stand beside you no matter what, and suddenly realized they had already made a decision about your life without you, a decision so final, so calculated, that by the time you understood what was happening, it was already too late to stop it? Because that's exactly how it began for me, not with shouting, not with anger, but with smiles, soft voices, and a kind of kindness that felt rehearsed, like a script everyone knew except me, and that was the moment I should have understood something was very wrong. It started like an ordinary afternoon, the kind where nothing feels different on the surface, but something underneath is quietly shifting, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself, and I remember sitting there in my own living room. The same room I had spent years building a life in, watching my children move around with a strange kind of urgency, exchanging looks they thought I didn't notice. Speaking in careful tones like every word had been chosen ahead of time, and I felt it, that small, uncomfortable feeling in my chest that whispered, "Pay attention." "Mom, we've been thinking," my daughter said, her voice gentle, almost too gentle, the kind of tone people use when they're not asking, they're informing. Thinking, such a harmless word. But sometimes it carries consequences you can't undo. I looked at her, then at my son, noticing the way he avoided my eyes, the way his hands stayed clasped together like he was holding something back. And in that moment, I understood something I didn't want to accept. This wasn't a conversation, it was a decision. "We just want what's best for you," he added quickly, stepping in before I could respond, as if rehearsed, as if they had already practiced this moment. And that's when the feeling changed from confusion to something sharper. Because when people start talking about what's best for you without asking what you want, it usually means they've already decided. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice calm, steady, even though something inside me had already begun to tighten, already begun to prepare for something I couldn't yet see clearly. There was a pause, not long, but long enough to confirm everything I was starting to feel. "We think it would be better if you moved somewhere safer," my daughter continued, choosing her words carefully, watching my reaction closely, like she was measuring how much truth I could handle at once. Safer, another harmless word, another lie wrapped in concern. "I'm safe here," I replied quietly, my eyes moving slowly between them, searching for something familiar, something real, but all I found was hesitation and something else, something colder. "You fell last month," my son said quickly, seizing the opportunity, building the case, stacking reasons like evidence in a trial I didn't even know I was part of. What if something happens again? What if no one is there? Concern. Logic, fear, they were using all of it. And for a moment, just a moment, I almost believed them. Because that's the hardest part about betrayal. It doesn't feel like betrayal at first. It feels like care. "I'm managing," I said, more firmly this time, holding on to the last piece of control I had in that conversation, because deep down I knew if I gave them even a little ground, they would take all of it. But they didn't stop. Of course they didn't, because this wasn't a discussion, it was a plan. "We've already found a place," my daughter said softly, and just like that, everything changed. The room felt different, smaller, heavier. Like the walls themselves had closed in just enough to remind me I wasn't in control anymore. "You've found a place," I repeated slower now, letting the words settle, letting their meaning sink in, even though part of me didn't want to fully understand them. "It's really nice," she continued quickly, filling the silence before I could react. "They have staff medical care activities. You won't have to worry about anything. Won't have to worry, or won't be allowed to. There's a difference," and I could feel it. "You mean a nursing home," I said, not as a question, but as a realization. Another pause, another look exchanged between them, and then a nod. "Yes, but it's a good one," my son added, as if that changed anything, as if the word good could soften what they were really saying. "We've decided where you're going, we've decided how you'll live, we've decided you don't get a choice." And that's when something inside me shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a door closing. Because in that moment, I understood this wasn't about my safety, this wasn't about my comfort, this was about control, about convenience, about removing something that no longer fit into their lives the way they wanted it to. And suddenly, all the small things from the past few months started making sense. The whispered conversations, the financial questions, the way they had started handling things without asking me. It hadn't been random, it had been preparation. "You've already decided," I said, my voice steady, but my mind racing now, putting the pieces together faster than I could process them. "You didn't come here to ask me, you came here to tell me." Neither of them denied it. Because sometimes silence is the loudest answer. We just want to make this easier for you, my daughter said again, softer this time, almost pleading, but I could hear it now, the layer beneath the words, the part that wasn't about me at all. Easier for them, I leaned back slightly, my hands resting in my lap, still controlled, even as everything inside me shifted from confusion to clarity. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it, and the truth was simple. They thought I was weak. They thought I didn't understand. They thought I would accept this quietly like something inevitable, like something I had no power to stop. And maybe if they had done this differently, if they had been honest, if they had treated me like I still mattered, maybe things would have gone another way. But they didn't, and that was their first mistake. All right, I said finally, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me, because sometimes the strongest reactions are the quietest ones. Both of them looked relieved instantly, too quickly. Too easily, as if they had been waiting for that one word, that one sign that their plan would go smoothly. Really? My son asked, his shoulders relaxing, his tension disappearing almost instantly. I nodded. Yes, if you think it's best. And just like that, they believed they had won. They believed I had accepted it. They believed I didn't see what they had done. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't see, was that I wasn't agreeing because I was helpless. I was agreeing because I was watching. Because sometimes the only way to understand the full truth is to let people believe you don't already know it. And as they began talking about the move, about timelines, about arrangements they had clearly already made without me, I sat there quietly, listening, observing, remembering. Because if they thought this was the end of my control, they were about to learn something very important. I wasn't as unaware as they believed. I wasn't as weak as they assumed. And I definitely wasn't as helpless as they were about to find out. Do you know what it feels like to sit quietly while people rewrite your life right in front of you, as if your years, your sacrifices, your struggles can be neatly summarized into a few convenient decisions, as if everything you built can be handed over, repackaged, and controlled by the very people who only exist because of it? Because that's what hurt the most, not the idea of the nursing home, not even the betrayal, but the realization that to them, my life had become something manageable, something removable, something they could organize and file away like it no longer mattered. And the more I listened that day, the clearer it became this hadn't started recently. This had been building for a long time. After that conversation, things moved quickly, too quickly, faster than they should have, faster than any real decision about someone's life ever should. Within days, there were papers, schedules, calls being made in front of me without hesitation, without asking, without even pretending anymore that my opinion mattered, and I watched it all unfold with a calmness they mistook for acceptance. But inside, I was remembering. Because when people start treating you like you're no longer in control, the smartest thing you can do is stay quiet long enough to understand why. I had not always been the woman sitting in that chair. I had not always been someone they could talk over, decide for, move around like a responsibility. There was a time when everything they had came from me, every wall in that house, every bill that was paid, every opportunity they were given. It didn't appear out of nowhere. It was built, slowly, painfully, one decision at a time. I remember nights when the house was silent except for the sound of my own thoughts, calculating, planning, figuring out how to stretch what little we had into something that could last just a little longer, and mornings where I woke up already tired, already knowing the day ahead would demand more than I had left to give, but I gave it anyway. Because that's what you do when you're responsible for more than just yourself. You don't stop, you don't complain, you build, piece by piece, year by year, until one day there's something there, something real, something stable. Something your children can stand on without ever realizing how fragile it once was. And maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I made it look too easy. Maybe I hid the struggle too well. Because somewhere along the way, they stopped seeing the effort. They stopped seeing the cost. And they started seeing the result as something that simply existed, something that belonged to them just as much as it belonged to me. The signs had been there. Small at first, easy to ignore, conversations that stopped when I entered the room, questions about finances that felt too specific, too deliberate. Mom, have you thought about organizing your accounts? Mom, it would be easier if we helped manage things. Helpful words. Concerned tone, but underneath it, something else. Something I didn't want to acknowledge at the time. Because it's easier to believe your family is looking out for you than to consider they might be preparing for something else entirely. I remember one evening in particular. We were sitting at the table, the same table that had seen birthdays, arguments, quiet dinners, and everything in between, and my son brought up the topic again, casually, too casually. You shouldn't have to worry about all this anymore, he said, gesturing vaguely as if all this wasn't the very life I had built. We can take care of things for you. Take care of things. Another phrase that sounds kind until you realize what it really means. I looked at him then, really looked, and for a moment I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Not concern, not kindness, expectation. As if he was waiting for me to agree, waiting for me to hand something over. And that was the first time a thought crossed my mind that I immediately pushed away. But now, sitting there, watching everything unfold, I couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't about helping me, this was about control. And control doesn't happen overnight, it builds, quietly, step by step, until one day you realize you're no longer the one making decisions. The paperwork started appearing soon after. Documents I was asked to review, forms I was told were just formalities. Signatures requested with reassuring smiles and careful explanations that avoided too much detail. And I noticed something important in those moments. They never rushed me openly, but they created an environment where saying no felt unreasonable, where asking too many questions felt unnecessary, where trust was expected, not earned. And that's when I stopped seeing myself as part of the situation and started seeing it from the outside, like a pattern, like a plan. Because when you remove emotion, when you stop reacting and start observing, things become very clear. They weren't just moving me to a nursing home, they were repositioning me, removing me from the center of my own life, from my home, from my decisions, from my influence. And once that happened, everything else would be easier for them, cleaner. Simpler, controlled. That realization should have broken me. It should have made me angry, emotional, reactive. But it didn't, because something else took its place, something quieter, something stronger, clarity. Because once you understand what someone is trying to do, you have a choice. You can fight them directly, or you can let them believe they've already won. And I chose the second. The day they came to take me to the nursing home, everything was already arranged. My bags packed, my belongings reduced to what they considered necessary, my life condensed into something manageable. And as I walked through that house one last time, I let my fingers brush lightly against the walls, the furniture, the small details no one else would notice, not out of sadness, but out of recognition, because this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of understanding. They watched me carefully, waiting, expecting resistance, emotion, something they could respond to, but I gave them nothing. No arguments, no tears, no anger, just quiet agreement. And that made them comfortable, too comfortable, because people only relax when they believe there's no threat left. And that was their second mistake. As the car pulled away, as the house disappeared behind us, as they talked casually about the future as if everything was already settled, I sat there silently. Not defeated, not broken, just thinking, connecting the last pieces, seeing the full picture, because now I understood everything, why they had done this, what they were planning next, what they thought they had already secured. And more importantly, what they had overlooked. Because in their rush to take control, in their confidence that I was no longer paying attention, they forgot one very important thing. I had built everything they were trying to take. And people like me don't lose control that easily. In fact, by the time they realized what I had already done, it was going to be far too late to stop it. Have you ever been placed somewhere not because you needed help, but because someone else needed control, and the moment you arrive, you can feel it, not in what people say, but in what they assume about you, the way they look at you, the way they speak around you instead of to you, the way they decide what you understand without ever asking? Because the first thing they take from you in a place like that isn't your freedom, it's your identity, and if you're not careful, you start to believe them. The nursing home was exactly what they promised: clean, organized. Quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful, just contained. The kind of place where everything runs on schedule, where days blend into each other so smoothly you stop noticing time passing, where people move slowly, not always because they have to, but because there's nothing left pulling them forward. And that's what they expected from me: a slow fade, a quiet ending, a life reduced to routines and supervised care. But what they didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that I hadn't come there to disappear. I had come there to watch. The first few days, I said very little, not because I was confused, not because I was overwhelmed, but because silence reveals more than questions ever can. You see everything differently when people think you're not paying attention. Staff speak more freely, visitors behave more honestly, family members show who they really are, and I noticed everything. The way the nurses categorized people without realizing it: independent, difficult, forgetful, gone, labels that determined how they were treated, how much attention they received, how seriously they were taken. I let them place me wherever they wanted: quiet, compliant, harmless, because the moment people decide you're not a threat, they stop watching you closely, and that's when you learn the most. My children visited less than I expected. At first, it was frequent, careful, performative. They would ask if I was comfortable, if I needed anything, if everything was all right, but their eyes were never really on me. They were scanning the room, checking the environment, making sure everything looked exactly the way they wanted it to. Controlled, after that, the visits changed, shorter, less frequent, less necessary, because once they were certain I wasn't resisting, once they believed I had accepted my place, their urgency disappeared, and in its place came distance. But I didn't mind. In fact, I preferred it, because the less they watched me, the more freedom I had. You see, people think control comes from being present, but real control comes from being underestimated. There was a small desk in the corner of my room, nothing special, just a place to sit, to write, to pass time, but to me it became something else, a place to think, to plan, to remember. Because while they believed my world had become smaller, mine had actually become clearer. Every conversation I had overheard before, every document they had placed in front of me, every detail I had noticed but not yet acted on, now it all began to connect, like pieces of something finally forming a complete picture. And that's when I made my first move, not a big one, not something anyone would notice. Just a call, simple, quiet, carefully timed, because in a place like that, people assume calls are harmless, routine, forgettable, but this one wasn't. I spoke calmly, clearly, the same way I always had. Because strength isn't in how loudly you speak, it's in knowing exactly what to say, and more importantly, when to say it. After that, I waited, not passively, not helplessly, but with intention. Because once you set something in motion, you don't rush it, you let it unfold. You let people continue believing what they want to believe, and they believed everything was exactly as they had planned. They thought I was adjusting, settling in. Accepting my new life, they thought distance meant detachment, silence meant weakness, stillness meant surrender, and I let them believe it, because the truth is the most dangerous position you can be in is thinking you've already won. Weeks passed. Then a month, and slowly things began to shift, subtle at first, almost invisible. A call returned, a document reviewed, a detail corrected, nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, but enough. Enough to change the direction of things they thought were already decided. And the best part, they had no idea because they weren't looking. They weren't paying attention anymore. They had already placed me in a category, filed me away. Closed the chapter, but I wasn't finished, not even close, because while they believed they had removed me from control, they forgot something very important. Control doesn't come from where you are, it comes from what you know. And what you do with it. By the time they finally came back, by the time they walked through those doors with confidence, with certainty, with the quiet satisfaction of people who believe everything is exactly the way they left it, I was ready. Not to argue, not to explain, but to reveal, because they thought they had placed me somewhere I couldn't act, but in reality, they had given me the perfect place to prepare, and the moment they sat down across from me again, smiling. Relaxed, certain, I knew something they didn't. They thought they were coming to finish what they started, but they had no idea they were walking straight into something I had already set in motion. And this time, they weren't the ones in control anymore. Have you ever watched someone walk into a situation completely confident, completely certain, believing everything is under their control, while knowing without a doubt that they are about to lose it all, not because of luck, not because of chance, but because of choices they made long before they realized there would be consequences? Because that's exactly what it felt like when they walked into that room again, smiling, relaxed, carrying the same quiet confidence they had the day they placed me there, the kind of confidence that only comes when people believe the outcome is already decided, and in a way they were right, it was decided, just not in the way they thought. They didn't come alone this time. That was the first thing I noticed. There was someone with them, a man in a suit, professional, composed, the kind of person who doesn't get involved unless something official is about to happen. And suddenly everything made sense. This wasn't a visit. This was a step, the next step, the final step. They greeted me like nothing had changed, like everything was normal. Like I was still the same person they had left behind weeks ago, quiet, compliant, unaware. "How are you feeling?" my daughter asked, her voice soft, careful, as if she was playing a role she had already perfected. "Settling in okay," my son added, his tone casual, almost detached, like he was asking out of obligation rather than concern. I nodded slightly, calm, neutral, exactly what they expected. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is give people exactly what they think they're dealing with. They sat down across from me. The man in the suit opened his folder. Papers, of course, always papers. Because control is rarely taken by force, it's taken by signatures. "We just need to finalize a few things," my son said, leaning forward slightly, his posture confident, his expression already relaxed, like this was just a formality. A few things, such simple words, but I already knew what they meant: ownership, authority, access. The last pieces of a puzzle they thought they had already completed. This will make everything easier moving forward, my daughter added quickly, reinforcing the narrative, smoothing over the edges, making it sound reasonable, helpful, necessary. Easier for them, I glanced at the papers, didn't rush, didn't react, just looked. Because reactions are what people prepare for, stillness is what unsettles them. Go ahead, my son said, sliding the documents closer to me, a pen placed carefully beside them, like the outcome was already guaranteed. And for a moment, I let the silence stretch. Not long, just enough, enough for something subtle to shift, because confidence, when left unanswered, starts to turn into uncertainty. You've already arranged everything, I said quietly, my voice steady, controlled, carrying just enough weight to make them listen, but not enough to alarm them. They exchanged a quick glance, barely noticeable, but I saw it. Yes, we just thought it would be best to handle it now, my daughter replied, her tone still smooth, still composed, but not quite as certain as before. I nodded slowly, then looked up, not at the papers, at them, really looked. The way I hadn't before, because now I wasn't trying to understand, I already did. You've done a lot of planning, I continued, my voice calm, almost reflective, as if I was acknowledging their effort rather than questioning it. That made them relax just a little because acknowledgement feels like agreement, and that was exactly what they needed to believe. But then I said something they weren't expecting. So have I. The room changed, not loudly, not dramatically. Just shifted, a small pause, a slight tension, the kind that appears when something doesn't follow the script. What do you mean? My son asked, his tone still controlled, but now carrying a trace of something else: curiosity or maybe concern. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached for the small drawer beside me, opened it, and took out a folder, simple, unremarkable, but heavier than it looked. I placed it on the table between us. And for the first time since they walked in, they stopped leading the moment. What is that? My daughter asked, her voice quieter now, her confidence beginning to slip in small, almost invisible ways. This, I said calmly, sliding it toward them, is everything you didn't think I would do. They hesitated, just for a second, but that second was enough, because hesitation means doubt, and doubt means control is shifting. My son opened the folder. His eyes moved across the pages quickly at first, then slower, then stopped, completely. The color in his face changed, not dramatically, but enough for me to see it, enough for my daughter to notice. What is this? She asked again, but this time there was no softness in her voice, no control, just uncertainty. You remember all those papers you asked me to sign? I said quietly, leaning back slightly, my hands resting calmly in my lap, the ones you thought I didn't read carefully. Neither of them spoke. Because now they understood, not everything, but enough. I read every word, I continued, my voice steady, unwavering, and I made sure that nothing important was left unprotected. The man in the suit shifted slightly in his chair. Not comfortable anymore, not neutral, because now he understood too. You transferred authority, I said, meeting my son's eyes directly, but not ownership. Silence, heavy, unavoidable. And before I came here, I added, I made a few adjustments. That was the moment it hit them, fully, completely. The realization that what they thought was finished was never theirs to control in the first place. What kind of adjustments? My daughter asked, her voice barely steady now, her composure slipping piece by piece, exactly the way mine had weeks ago, but this time there was no one to catch her. I held her gaze, didn't rush. Didn't soften it enough, I said quietly, to make sure that no one moves me, controls me, or takes anything without my permission. My son leaned back slowly, his confidence gone, replaced with something else, something heavier. Understanding, because now he saw it, the full picture. The plan they thought they had executed perfectly was never complete, not without me, and I had never given them that, not really. You thought I was helpless, I said finally, my voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of everything they had underestimated, but you forgot something important. I paused, just long enough, just enough for it to land. I built everything you're trying to take. Silence filled the room again, but this time it wasn't uncertainty, it was realization, because in that moment they understood the truth they had missed from the beginning. They hadn't silenced me. They had exposed themselves, and now there was nothing left for them to control. Only consequences they were not ready to face. Have you ever watched someone realize in real time that everything they believed they controlled, everything they planned, everything they thought was already theirs is slipping away from them, and there is absolutely nothing they can do to stop it? Not because someone fought them loudly, not because there was a dramatic confrontation, but because the truth quietly removed the ground beneath their feet, and suddenly, they're left standing on nothing but their own mistakes, because that's what that moment felt like, sitting there across from them, watching their expressions change, watching confidence turn into confusion. And confusion slowly harden into something far more uncomfortable: regret. No one spoke at first, not my son, not my daughter, not even the man in the suit who had come there expecting a routine signature, a simple conclusion, a clean transfer of control, because moments like that don't need noise. They carry their own weight. My son was the first to move, not forward, back, leaning into his chair like the distance might help him process what had just happened, his eyes still fixed on the papers in front of him as if reading them again might somehow change what they said, might reveal a different outcome, a different ending, but there wasn't one. There never was. You changed everything, he said finally, his voice quieter now, stripped of the certainty it once carried, and for the first time since all of this began, he sounded unsure. I didn't respond immediately. Because this wasn't about proving anything, it was about letting the truth settle. I protected what I built, I said calmly, my voice steady, not defensive, not emotional, just clear. There's a difference, and he heard it. My daughter, on the other hand, wasn't ready to accept it yet. This doesn't make sense, she said quickly, her voice rising just enough to reveal the panic she was trying to hide. We were just trying to help you, we thought. No, I said gently, but firmly, stopping her before she could reshape the story into something more comfortable, something easier to accept. You thought I wouldn't notice. Silence again, but this time it was different, heavier, because now there was no misunderstanding left, only truth, and truth is harder to argue with. I gave you everything, I continued, not as an accusation, but as a fact, something that existed whether they acknowledged it or not. A home, stability, a life you didn't have to fight for the way I did. My eyes moved between them slowly. Not judging, not angry, just seeing them clearly. For a long time, I thought that meant something, I added quietly, but somewhere along the way, you started believing it belonged to you. Neither of them spoke because there was nothing to say. No defense that wouldn't sound hollow. No explanation that wouldn't reveal more than it fixed, and in that silence something shifted again, not in the room, in them, because consequences don't always arrive loudly. Sometimes they arrive as understanding, the kind you can't ignore, the kind that stays with you. My son looked up finally, really looked at me, and for the first time since all of this began, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not confidence, not control, something else, guilt. We didn't mean to, he started, but the words didn't finish, because intentions don't erase actions, and deep down he knew that. I know, I said softly, and I meant it. Because the truth is, most people don't start with bad intentions. They start with small compromises, small justifications, small decisions that feel harmless at the time, until one day they're standing somewhere they never thought they'd be, hurting someone they never thought they'd hurt. You didn't think it through, I continued, my voice calm, almost reflective now. You made it easier for yourselves and told yourselves it was for me. That landed, harder than anything else. Because it was true, and truth doesn't need volume. My daughter's composure finally broke, not completely, but enough. We can fix this, she said quickly, leaning forward, her voice softer now, less certain, more desperate. We can undo whatever needs to be undone. We just wanted things to be easier. For who? I asked quietly. And that question stopped everything, because sometimes the simplest questions are the hardest to answer. No one spoke, not because they didn't hear me, but because they did, and they understood what it meant. I let the silence stay. Not to punish them, but to give them space to feel it, because growth doesn't come from being told you're wrong. It comes from realizing it yourself. After a moment, I reached forward slowly and closed the folder, not abruptly. Not aggressively, just calmly, like the decision had already been made. Nothing is changing today, I said, my voice steady, final in a way that didn't need to be forceful. Not the house, not the accounts, not my life. They nodded slightly. Not an agreement, but an understanding, because for the first time they didn't have control over the outcome, and that was new for them, uncomfortable, unfamiliar, but necessary. The man in the suit quietly gathered his things, his role in this situation suddenly unclear, unnecessary, and without a word, he stood and excused himself, leaving behind a silence that felt more honest than anything that had been said before. My children stayed, of course they did, because now there was nothing left to hide behind, no paperwork, no plan, just us and the truth. I'm not cutting you out, I said after a while, my tone softer now, not because I was unsure, but because I had nothing left to prove, but things are going to be different. They listened. Carefully, because now every word mattered. You don't get to decide for me anymore, I continued, meeting their eyes one last time, making sure they understood, really understood. You don't get to move me, manage me, or control anything that belongs to me. A pause. Thens you can be part of my life, I added quietly, but only if you remember it's my life. That was the moment everything settled, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to move forward. Because not every story ends with revenge. Some end with something harder: boundaries, respect, truth. In the weeks that followed, things changed. Not overnight, not easily, but gradually, the way real change always does. My children visited more, not out of obligation, but with intention, careful, respectful, learning slowly what they had forgotten. And me, I stayed where I was, not because I had to, but because I chose to for a time. Because leaving immediately would have felt like running, and I wasn't running anymore. I was deciding every day on my terms, and that made all the difference. Because in the end, this was never about a nursing home, or money, or control. It was about something much deeper, something people often forget until it's too late. That strength doesn't disappear with age, that silence doesn't mean weakness, and that the most dangerous mistake you can make is believing someone has no power left just because you stopped seeing it. Because the truth is, the strongest people are often the ones you underestimate the most.